What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a look at some of the new details about Warhammer 40k Dark Heresy. In particular, via Gamescom, as Owlcat was there showing off the game via a hands-off demo, we have a bunch of details from the people who were at those presentations, alongside officially released screenshots to coincide with that we can, of course, gain a whole bunch of information about the game from. Now, full disclosure, Owlcat did ask if I was going to be attending Gamescom so I could take a look at some of this stuff in person. Unfortunately, that is not something I was able to do, but they were still kind enough to provide the assets like the screenshots and things directly, and the embargo for that stuff lifted yesterday from the time of this video, so you may have seen a little bit about it already. But I decided to take a little extra time to gather, frankly, a bunch more information. Now, I want to kick this video off not so much with the brand new stuff, but actually a confirmation of an update they put out roughly a week ago from the time of this video, which is that the graphics are actually going to be improving significantly coming from Rogue Trader, which I think is important to mention because I think anybody trying to move the needle in terms of graphical fidelity when it comes to isometric games is worth taking a look at. But the two really big things I wanted to focus on were how much better this makes hair look, alongside how much more detail they were able to add to individual character models. They mostly attributed this to just, the studio growing, having more time, being able to put more resources into these models. So not, wildly important in terms of gameplay, mind you, but, nonetheless cool to know. Now, in terms of the demo, it took place around the roughly 15-hour mark in terms of in-game time. They are leading their party of the Inquisitor's retinue across the planet of Scintilla, which seems to have been marked by the Tyrant Star. Now, that's a wordy bit of exposition if you don't know what any of that means, but basically we are playing as an acolyte of the Inquisition in Dark Heresy, as that is the point, and our job is to get to the bottom of various investigations to help the Inquisition combat the Xenos scum targeting the Imperium of Man. Now, they did make mention that your retinue might not entirely understand what you are. That is to say, it seems like you're keeping secrets from some of your companions, which is pretty on brand for a member of the Inquisition. I just thought that was interesting given what we know about the companions that have already released, which is a separate video I have made. Now, the Tyrant Star is this sort of celestial phenomenon that kills planets, more or less, and it looks like Scintilla has been marked, but before that happens, we would like to get to the bottom of some disappearances that happened here. This seems to be largely being done in order to gain the trust of the Tyrantine Cabal, or the sort of local sect of the Inquisition, and that's what we're doing with some of these investigations. Now, they have made it clear that much like Rogue Trader, you don't necessarily need to be familiar with Warhammer 40k to do all of this, but it sounds like the kind of thing that would probably help nonetheless, because they focused on one of the newer mechanics that is coming with Dark Heresy, which is the investigations. Now, curiously enough, I think the investigations might be replacing the sort of side mechanic that their games are known for, like the Crusade and Wrath of the Righteous, or Colony Management and Rogue Trader. I think that might be the investigations in this one. Because as you investigate a disappearance, these crime scenes basically, you're going to find all sorts of evidence that then gets logged. What's more, there seems to be some sort of awareness skill that can help you find like extra details, and then presumably other skills that are going to allow you to also find extra information about the situation. Now, they mention that when you turn all of this information in, that's where things get interesting, because they are going to let you choose the options based on the evidence you have found. The game is not going to steer you in a specific direction in terms of like right or wrong. There's no like, you have to find this in order to progress, at least in the case of this investigation, but it sounds like they're going to let you make wrong choices here, which can lead to the game's consequences. So how thoroughly you engage with the investigations does seem to be a decent part of this game. In particular, they mentioned being able to reply to a bunch of leads or evidence that you may have found, giving you all sorts of different options, but ultimately how to interpret that and provide the right or wrong answer is ultimately up to you. And as mentioned, it seems like that's probably going to lead to a great deal of this game's choice and consequence. Now, other systems they went on to explain a little bit more is that following this, as part of the demo, there was apparently a confrontation with ne'er-do-wells, I suppose, who had taken some people hostage, and for whatever reason, you are the hostage negotiator in this situation. And using various skills, you could actually influence that negotiation a little bit, which would then have an impact on the upcoming fight that you're about to have. What they mentioned specifically was being able to basically butter up the criminals here, if you will, by sending in poisoned alcohol to, of course, make the fight easier, but also open the door when that fight starts. That's important because a facet of fighting in this game seems to involve timers, which, to be fair, we did see a little bit of in Rogue Trader. And what I mean by that is that there are occasionally countdowns to something happening, in this case, executing hostages. Now, in terms of combat, we don't have full details, but we know that both the system as well as just a lot of the general mechanics of this are being based on what they've already done in Rogue Trader, so a lot of it's the same. But nonetheless, there were some differences that were pointed out, like the reworked cover system. There seemed to be a couple different types. Cover that would provide full cover, which would presumably protect you from incoming hits and things like that, but they also mentioned cover that just specifically blocked line of sight, but I admit they were a little vague on this one. Now, another interesting mechanic that they mentioned is armor durability. In particular, armor durability is going to protect you from wounds or critical hits. Basically, it sounds like, in combination with these screenshots, that your armor's only going to hold up for so long before it starts letting more and more damage through. Now, when it comes to critical hits, those are interesting because they can have extra effects on what part of the body that they impact. And one of the screenshots they put up kind of shows this, but they did mention that in order to specifically target an individual body part, you have to have somebody with a precision attack. They show one of our previously announced companions doing this, so it's hard to say how widespread that would be, but otherwise it just seems to be a little more random. But obviously, whether or not you build around those criticals or whatnot can lead to varying outcomes. Another thing they wanted to talk about was the slightly reworked momentum system from Rogue Trader. So Rogue Trader's momentum seemed to be party-wide, whereas what they talk about here is a morale system. This seems to be a little more on the individual level, but there were things that could affect the entire team, basically. So they gave the example of this gang having their leader killed, lowering their morale, for instance. Nonetheless, it looks like once your morale gets to a certain high or low, you get, responses as a result. If it gets really high, you'll get a buff and a powerful ability to use, and again, more or less, Rogue Trader's momentum system, albeit slightly different. Also worth a mention, from some of these screenshots, we can get a look at some of their reworked UI. In fact, some of it looks a little more like papers you would file, which I would suppose makes sense given the nature of the investigations you're supposed to be doing. But I also noticed more subtle changes to the UI, like for instance in the combat screen, they have that purple bar to the left, which kind of reminds me of the sort of like veil meter for the psychers and stuff in Rogue Trader, where if basically you use more and more psyker abilities, that could lead to warp trouble. And I imagine they'll probably have a similar system here, given, of course, just the very nature of the game itself. So all interesting things. I would say one more subtle change that I also really enjoyed is that I don't know how expansive this is, or maybe if it's just for these precision hits that the screenshot shows, but it did actually show your breakdown of hit chance and things when you marked over certain body parts in the screenshot. I'm curious if that applies to every attack, because I actually think that would be super handy for a game like this that has more tactically oriented combat, but no for sure confirmation on that. But all of that said, I think that just about wraps up all the new details that came out of Gamescom for Warhammer 40k Dark Heresy, so hopefully you enjoyed that video. Let me know how you feel about all this stuff down in the comments section below, which of course means to comment, subscribe, all the YouTube jazz, but regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.